Good morning, and thank you once again for coming to sunny San Francisco. You may know me as Digitsu, but my real name is Jerry David Chan. Little about me, I've worked about 14 years in Wall Street as a technology front office trading systems developer. And in the course of my 14 years, I've had a rare opportunity to sort of see the merging of finance, economics, and also market-driven forces and how market, kind of the dynamics work behind it. So it was no kind of surprise when I learned about Bitcoin that I saw this revolution about to happen, and I couldn't just sit idly by it and just watch it happen. So I got involved in Bitcoin, I suppose, as a speculative trader originally in around 2013. I missed the big early adopter bumps in price, but as I learned more about Bitcoin, I got really very interested in the technology behind it, and particularly the economic dynamics that make Bitcoin work, in my opinion. So currently, I live and work in Japan on several Bitcoin projects. One of them is Satoshi coin, which is a physical Bitcoin, really cheap and economical, meant to appeal to the novelty market of Japan. So because it's all part of the same idea, which is if we can get Bitcoin in the hands of more people, that will help grow the network. I also do a little bit of work for Bitcoin.com and any sort of Bitcoin initiatives which serve to help the network grow. And that's kind of brings me to why we have this conference here. Once again, thanks to our sponsor Bitcoin Unlimited for making all this possible. I'd quickly like to go over the main sort of themes, overarching themes that this conference is going to be about, and you're going to hear spoken to about in detail as the day goes on, which is, one, the general scaling debate that we have at present. Also, the economics behind Bitcoin, because I believe that is something that not enough people speak about. The true nature of decentralization, that's also a buzzword which is used quite often. And first layer scaling versus base layer scaling. So as one of my things I'm working on is the on-chain scaling conferences, and that's very much on trying to drive on-chain or first layer or base layers. And this notion that you'll hear today about called this notion of emergent consensus and consensual forking, that's something that we want to talk about. So first, let's just quickly go over the scaling debate, right? So chances are you're here today because you feel there is an impasse currently in Bitcoin. And part of the reason that, the reason that the fact that there are those who do not believe that there is a problem is kind of part of the issue. This issue has divided the community into, and polarized it into those who believe that scaling should be done mostly on-chain versus off-chain, and also has divided people between the theorists and the pragmatists, the conservatives and the progressives. Surrounding all this debate is a very thick layer of FUD. And similar to its like-sounding cousin, FUD has a way of muddying up the issue to the point where it becomes increasingly difficult for the average reader to separate the science from the scientism. So, economics is hard. Imagine you were a traveler in the medieval times, and you walked into riding into a town, and you went to stop to stay at the inn, and the humbly dressed innkeeper and wench serve you a humble, modest meal of bread, cheese, and meat in a wooden bowl. Now, some days later, you may travel to another city or village, and at that town, the inn is lavishly decorated with gold and silver goblets, and everybody's feasting on turkey, ham, and wine, right? Now, if you were that traveler, which village, which community would you say is more wealthy? Well, it turns out that previous to the 17th century, it was quite easy to answer the question. It's more likely than not that the second town or village, which was much more prosperous and wealthy than the first. But ever since money has evolved from a hard currency to more of an open loop circulation of debt or of promises to repay, the answer is less clear. And in the modern age, it's almost equally as likely that you can really tell which of these situations would indicate which town was more wealthy. It could very well be that the second town was just burning its resources, its savings, operating completely in debt. So if you make it worthwhile to look wealthy, then it shouldn't surprise anyone that people are going to spend their savings more on the image of wealth rather than true wealth itself. So fundamentally, Bitcoin is a technical and economic solution to a very old problem, the Byzantine generals problem. And we must keep this in mind, that many who ignore the economic effects are ignoring half of what makes Bitcoin work. So decentralization now, a very often used term, I believe is a means, not an end. The goal is to have a trust-minimized system without the need for intermediaries. And decentralization essentially requires just two main ingredients, right? One, an economic solution to the Byzantine generals problem or the double spend problem. And Bitcoin achieves that via its proof of work. The second thing it requires, which is equally as important, is a permissionless protocol, which is based on open source software that can be forked. Thus, decentralization is guaranteed in the long run, as long as anyone is able to assume the reins of power simply by providing a service to the network, whether that be in providing mining hash, or running full node, or writing code for different implementations of the protocol. So let me quickly run over the talking points of second layer scaling versus on-chain scaling. Now, why not use something like Lightning or sidechains? We should definitely use it, but we have to recognize that it comes with pros and cons. First off, second layer networks are a completely different network, and it comes with it a completely different security model and a different attack surface. It's primarily a solution for payments only, whereas Bitcoin is a solution for many more things besides just payments. Bitcoin is kind of like a digital commodity, where something like Lightning Network or payment channels is more like bank accounts. It comes with the cost of the funds you need to commit or encumber to use payment channels. It's very similar to the need for me to deposit my money into a bank account before I can wire transfer things to people. So that value of my commodity is slightly different and not completely fungible with trading the commodity itself. One other thing to be aware of that occurs to me about second layer and scaling solutions is, what if Lightning were to achieve the goal of replacing Visa for all payments globally? Well, then it would concern me that basing such a high volume flow network on top of the existing Bitcoin infrastructure without changing it would put us in a very precarious position. For instance, if at the point where the second layer network were to achieve its maximum near infinite transaction per second, what if a very large set of payment hubs were to just shut off? Then would the world, which is now dependent on instantaneous near infinite number of transactions per second, be able to fall back on Bitcoin as it is today? It's not so clear that it would be able to. So does Bitcoin need to scale so that we can achieve Visa level of transactions on chain? maybe we don't need to. We just need to scale it as far as we can. And secondary networks would pick up the ball from where Bitcoin will cease to scale itself on chain. But the important thing is that we keep the network effect of Bitcoin going. Because at the end of the day, it's the network effect of Bitcoin which gives it most of its value. And as many of you in this room know and understand, money itself is a network effect. And it's a network effect that's only persuasive if more people hold it. If more people hold the currency and also will be able to provide services and goods in exchange for that currency, that gives money its value. So we must strive to preserve the network effect of Bitcoin by getting it into as many hands as possible, and not just in the hands of a select few. So finally, I'd like to talk briefly about cognitive biases, because we see this everywhere in our community. Because Bitcoin is such a mixed discipline between computer science, economics, finance, mathematics, cryptography, everyone is bound to have some sort of cognitive bias depending on your background. Our job is to try to minimize this whenever we can in order to try to remain as objective as possible. That's our goal. And that's one of the reasons why we want to do these conferences. In order to appreciate how these biases can color proponents in the space, let me illustrate this with an example. Some of you may know the famous quote by John Maynard Keynes, who said something along the lines of, if the Treasury were to bury all the fiat notes into empty bottles and dump them into abandoned mine shafts and cover it with garbage, and then lease out the land of these mine shafts to companies, which would then employ people to dig the bottles of cash out, then the general capital, the capital wealth of the community would actually be greater than it currently is. So that statement, that quote, has remarkably different meanings for different people, depending on your cognitive bias. For instance, some of us may hear that and say, wow, this is a perfect justification of proof of work mining. Virtual mining is just as good as digging up bottles of cash in abandoned mine shafts. So therefore, Satoshi had something real, something going there. Others may say, Keynes was actually criticizing sound money advocates and saying digging up yellow metal is just as stupid as digging up pieces of paper thrown in there by the treasury. So what's a big deal about gold? The opposite people may also see that quote as supporting their point of view, and they would point out, well, Keynes is obviously making some pragmatic mistakes. One, if the Treasury were to bury all the fiat, what's to stop the Treasury from printing more fiat? And that doesn't really give the world any guarantee against hyperinflation. And also the more obvious point of, if the Treasury really told you they did this, who would believe them? Would you? I don't prove it to me. Is the bottles really in the mine shaft? So everybody has their own kind of perspective on general statements. And this is kind of the crux of the problem that we're dealing with today with the scaling debate. Because given a set of facts, everybody has a different kind of a way of reading it. So I'd like to leave you with a personal observation of mine, quite recently actually. Given I live in Tokyo, I recently went on a camping trip with a family. And I was on the Shinkansen, which is the bullet train. And I noticed as we were pulling out of the metropolitan area of Tokyo and passing by the suburbs, that the platforms that were going by were all empty. There was nobody on the platforms. And it was the middle of the day on a weekday. And I was really perplexed as to why nobody was on the train platforms. It was only until I sort of put away my assumptions and really thought about this pragmatically and scientifically, that I realized that it was not the fact that the platforms were empty. It was actually the fact that because I was traveling at 300 kilometers per hour or something, whatever a bullet train travels at, it actually has the effect of making people invisible in broad daylight at that speed, because it's just going by too fast. So it's just something to realize that with all our cognitive biases, I hope you listen to the talks today and try to take all the facts and analyze it as objectively as possible. So with that, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, President of Bitcoin Limited, Andrew Clifford. Start us off. Thank you.